All right, so we're now being recorded, so anything we say will be recorded in this video for her, so she'll be able to follow along as we go through the demonstration here today.
Okay, perfect.
All right, well, I've got it sharing here. What we can do is, obviously, you've got the Compass module. You have to know at least a tiny bit about it, but to give you a little bit of extra background here on the Compass module, we built the Compass module so you can put in your competency assessments into our system. The benefit of this system is that where if you were doing everything manually before, you were having to keep track of dates, of people, of the different competency assessments. That's a very large amount of data to have to keep track of. With our system, what's going to happen is when you put in your assessments, you know which assessments you have in the system because they'll be in a list. When you assign them to a user, you'll be able to view that specific user or an assessment to see who the assessment is assigned to in that case. So you can easily, through different routes, see who assessments are assigned to for a specific person, what do they have assigned to them, and then where are they with this assessment? Are they up to date? Are they missing any? Who's responsible for making sure that they're keeping track of and completing these assessments? It also automatically will assign the correct activities based on the date. So if you're a new hire and you set...
Can you hang on for a second? She's just calling me on the other line, so I'm going to put you on hold again.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Here. All right, so we're recording again. So where I'm at right now is I'm logged into the Home and To Do page. And before you jumped on the line, Tricia and I were talking about the graph that shows up on the Home and To Do page under the Compass administration. The graph that's on the Home and To Do page is going to show you who's been assigned the assessments as far as the number of people. Are they up to date? Are they in review? Are they incomplete or are they overdue? So you'll have a nice, easy pie chart to see the overall progress of your entire system. So if you have 500 people and you assign them all 5 to 10 different competency assessments, it will tell you how many total assessments you have and then where you are kind of in the pie chart of how many assessments do we have left here that are still outstanding. So the pie chart, what you'll see when you're logged into your account right now is you'll see this kind of sliver under where it says me, my organization, and subscriptions. It will say completion status out of 0 assessments for your users, and then it goes to list off how many are up to date, in review, incomplete, or overdue. So once you start assigning these to people, that's where that pie chart, that completion status bold heading right there, will then get that pie chart. And then to the right of those, the green assessment text, purple, yellow, and red, you'll get the assessments due next 8 weeks. That's going to give you a bar graph of how many assessments are going to be coming due within the next 8 weeks. So in a kind of 2-month window, you can see exactly how many you've got coming up. You might look into those to see if there's any administrative actions that need to be taken to fill out somebody's maybe direct observation checklist. That way you can get with people to make sure they're completing what they need to complete. If you've delegated responsibility for some users down to managing a subset of your employees to keep track of their employees' competency assessments, you can look at that as well to see with the people you've given that responsibility, are they doing everything? Are we completing these as needed and on time? So the Home and To Do page is going to be a great item for everybody who's an administrator to, at a quick glance, see where you are in the status of all your assessments.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
And just based on how we're currently running our program.
Sure.
So currently how we're running the program is we're basically having the entire year to complete assessments.
Sure.
So are you suggesting that the better way to do this would be to, do parts of it along the way, or does it matter because of the completion date, if they're showing the next 8 weeks, it'll show nobody's due anything until the last 2 months of the year.
Right, right. So what you can do then is you can still pull reports to see who's still got an incomplete assessment then at that point. So you can still see those assessments that you need to take care of. The reason we do the 8 weeks here is simply because of the space. If we made this graph any longer, let's say throughout the year from month to month, you lose a little bit more of the fine-grained what is happening this week and next week, especially with the amount of assessments you have. You might want to know on a week-to-week basis just what's going on. So that's simply why we put the 8 weeks here. But you can also, if we look, if I go to let's see here. Let me hide my interface here. There's the reports button in the top right-hand corner. And if you work that, you can pull a report of specific assessments, specific users, and you can show people who have incomplete assessments, what phase are they in, initial training, 6 month or annual. That way you can get a report of anybody who's still got these incomplete assessments, and that graph, while it's 8 weeks, this will give you the full scope of who still got something that's not complete. So you can still view that here. You can still see it. The way our system is going to work is that by regulations, you have to, really, they want you to do it throughout the year. They don't want you to do everybody's on, let's say, January 1st to the end of January. They don't want everybody to be within the same month. And especially you wouldn't want that as well, because with all of the users and all of the assessments, trying to get everything done within 1 month would just be so hectic that that's primarily, one reason people are usually behind, is that they try to do too much at one time. So depending on the requirement and what you need to complete, you have the option in our system to push that date back a little bit further and give people more time to complete assessments. So I can show you how that works in our system.
Okay.
If we were to go to competency assessment at the top and then scroll down to, let's see here, we want to look at the add, edit, and delete activities next to any of our competency assessments. And I'll do one that's open for editing here. And when I do that, I get the option, if I go to, let me check here, if I go to the details next to any of those, let's see, it may not actually let me edit here. I may have to do it when I actually edit an activity. Oh, no, that's right, I'm sorry. It's available actions for the competency assessment. At the top, it's that drop-down list, and you have the edit name, complexity, assessment date, or due date link here. So when you create a competency assessment, it asks you a few things here. When is the assessment date? So when do we want you to be assigned the assessment to complete? So let's say your initial assessment you completed January 1st of this year. So let's say there is no 6-month assessment. It's only your initial and every annual assessment after that. So your initial, you completed January 1st. Here it says how many days before the anniversary date do we want to assign that assessment. And here it says 30 days before the anniversary date. So if we completed it January 1st, another year after that is January 1st. So go back 30 days, and it would assign it basically at the beginning of December.
Yeah, okay.
Just back all the way to 90 days, so you can give them 3 months before that anniversary date. Now, we can extend this. These are just the options we have right now.
Okay.
We try not to put it too terribly far back, especially because if you imagine you have an initial a 6-month assessment that you do if it's a non-wave test, and you have that at 6 months, and then your first annual one, you wouldn't want that to be an entire year. It has to have some kind of point where it doesn't go past that 6 months. So basically, if it's January 1st and then July 1st starts your 6-month assessment, and then your first annual starts next January 1st, if you roll back an entire year from that 6-month, you don't want it to be before the 6-month assessment was completed. So we're trying not to conflict with dates is how that's working here.
Okay. So again, I think like the way we have set up the system, and it's quite likely if we move forward with this, we'd have to change the system, is that individuals have been given an entire year to complete it because all of the elements
Right.
are sort of put into a single competency.
Right.
Whereas in this case, you pull out each of those elements individually. So for example, EPT would be an element, maybe, an observation would be an element, test questions would be another element, or?
Right, yeah, exactly.
How is
So for these, if I open up any of the competency assessments here, I went to competency assessments at the top, and I just opened any of our ones that we've already got created, and I went to add, edit, and delete activities. So these activities are going to be the things in the competency assessment that actually prove that the person's competent in whatever that assessment's for. So in this case, the one I've opened in our test account is the Abbott Precision Exceed Pro blood glucose meter. It's a sample non-waved assessment. In your own site, Joyce, if you want to look, you've got a specimen management Westman lab, one that you've created. And if you hit add, edit, and delete activities next to that, it looks like you've already got some annual assessments assigned under there. With these activities, these are going to help you fulfill the requirements that you might need to follow. So depending on who you are accredited by and what kind of competency assessments you have to complete, what all steps are in those, our system is built off of the different CLIA items that you would need to complete. So in our system, you'll see CLIA referenced many different times as far as what you need to do for competency assessment. So in our system, above each of the different activity levels, you'll see above the actual activities themselves, we have applicable CLIA competency assessment procedures. These are the different things within a competency assessment that you have to complete to show that the person's competent in whatever that either test or platform is over. So if we hover over any of the boxes, it gives us that exact item. So the first box is the first CLIA procedure, which is direct observations of routine patient test performance, including patient preparation, if applicable, specimen handling, processing, and testing. If we hover over the other ones, they show up here as well. And you'll see as I hover over these, it highlights in yellow each of the activities that says, this is how I'm fulfilling that activity. So if we hovered again over direct observation, we have a checklist, another kind of activity, and two other ones here. There's a second checklist further down, and then the Abbott Precision Exceed Pro blood glucose meter copied for editing a little further down. That's got 30 graded questions attached to it. So here, that's how we're meeting these different CLIA categories. You'll see that there are 6 here, but there's also a 7th kind of hanging out at the end. The state of New York has their own 7th category that they've mandated. You can hide this in the option if obviously you're not in the state of New York, so you can hide this option from there. But it's the 7th bubble that shows up next to these CLIA competency assessment procedures. So with these,
and the 7th one is around observing safety,
Right, their last one is observation for compliance with safety protocols, which, I mean, that may be something that you want to check your items for anyway, because you might consider that maybe a part of one of the other requirements. So, it just depends on if that's something you would want to adhere to as well. You can turn that item on and off just in the options for Compass. So that's just something that they've created on their own for the state of New York. For these different activities, there's many different types of activities here. So in this drop down below the list of activities we already have, we've got complete a course, which includes graded questions. This is good for problem solving. If you make a course that has questions that people have to analyze and actually answer with correct answers, completing a course is a great item. We also have completed checklist. This is great for direct observation because you can actually observe and check off that the person did what they were supposed to do. If you have document control, I know you don't right now, but if you ever did, you could link to a document control document and require that your employees sign on those documents. That could be maybe the procedure for being able to use this blood glucose meter. How do I, draw the blood? How do I put it on the meter reader to actually tell what the glucose level is? So in this case here, we would maybe link to the procedure and have that as something to make sure if they haven't already signed in document control as a performing employee, that they do it at least here with their competency assessment to make sure that gets done before they perform the item they need to perform. We've got review or complete an uploaded file. This is great if it's something like a Word document or a PDF document that you want somebody to download, to fill out, and re-upload to the site. This could be something like a waiver that you want them to sign for some reason. They could print it, sign it, scan it, and put it back into the system. Or you could have it to where it's just a simple, yes, I affirm that I have read this document, and they just simply click it to put their signature, quote, signature to that item. We have an other activity, which is basically just providing a description. What that is for most people is something like attended training day or skills day. This could be where somebody goes, they sit through 4 or 5 different modules that are in a room, they assess their competency on different kinds of items, and somebody just checks off that, yes, they were there that day. So somebody would come in and just simply check off that, yes, they did make it that day. You can copy assessments from different locations in your competency assessment. So if you've got, let's say, an initial item and you want to copy that to your 6-month and annual items, that way you can use that in different locations as well. You can do that here. That way, if you've got a checklist and you want to modify it from your initial to your 6-month, you can simply just copy it from your initial, make modifications to make it fit your 6-month assessment. And then here, you'll see we've got some kind of gibberish items at the bottom. Joyce, these are, here we just got some ones that show up under at the end of that drop-down list where you add a new activity. Basically, it's just a whole bunch of gibberish letters, but that's to show these are custom activities. These are of the same type here, that other activity where you provide a description, but you can create your own here. So if you know many times you're going to be doing something like attended training day for your different assessments, you may make a template that is attended training day so people don't have to type that in over and over and over again. You just automatically create that as a kind of template activity that people can assign from this drop-down menu for adding an activity. If we add any activity, I'll just add a course here really quickly to show you the additional items that it asks you. If it's a course or checklist, it's going to ask you, is this one you've already created? Since you've already got compliance in CE, you can share your courses you've created in compliance in CE with the Compass system as well. So if you've been doing any competency assessment over there, you don't have to recreate the wheel. You can share it with Compass and then use those items within the Compass system for your competency assessments. So for example, we have some courses within here. What was that? I'm sorry?
Well, that's the kind of the system we've been using, right, is the compliance and CE system up to this point.
Right, and you've had that for courses as well as, I don't know if you've used it for competency assessment, but if you have, this is how you could shift that over. Basically, you would go into those courses from the compliance and CE side, you'd share it with Compass, and then it would show up in your drop-down list here when you go to actually select that course to add as an activity. So some of these may have come from the compliance and CE modules. So I know that this demo checklist and demo competency course, we created these two within the compliance and CE module and shared them with Compass. So if we select one of these here, it will then let us add this course to this competency assessment. We can tell it to include all questions if we want it to. Let's say there are 30 questions in the course, we can have it include all 30 questions, or we can use the drop down to choose how many questions we want included from that course itself. If you choose over the maximum amount of questions that are in the course, then it's just going to assign the max amount, which would be 30 in our hypothetical case. You have another item called the max allowed attempt. What this is going to do is, let's say your user goes through, they get assigned their competency profile. They go into a course that you've assigned them for, let's say, problem solving, and they fail the course. You have a passing score of 70%. They make a 63% on it. Obviously, that's not a great thing. You don't want that to happen, but we can set the max allowed attempts here to let them try again. So what will happen here is they get assigned the first attempt, they try it, they fail it, and then gives them the second attempt. They go in, they can try it again, and then if they fail that, they get their third attempt and they try that again. If they happen to fail all 3 times, what will happen is it locks them out of this course and assigns a new activity to that profile that can only be completed by the administrator. Basically, it's saying, and an email goes out to administrators as well, saying, hey, this person did fail all of their attempts for this course. Maybe we need some further remediation, or maybe this is just a really big red flag, because if it's something very basic and this person can't finish a course on something very basic, maybe they're the wrong employee for the laboratory. Some labs don't even give people additional attempts. They might just complete this to maximum allowed attempts as 1, or you can go all the way up to 10 maximum allowed attempts. We went to 10 simply because if you fail a course more than 10 times, obviously there's more wrong here than just the course. It's probably going to need some other kind of intervention than just the course itself. And then below the maximum allowed attempts is the CLIA applicable categories here. You'll see it starts with number 1, the direct observation. You've got the monitoring and recording and reporting of test results. So you've got all of the different CLIA items here. So for people who are CAP accredited, they have to follow these assessments. Anybody in the U.S., they have to follow these. Joint Commission, anybody in the U.S. has to follow these. I'm not sure who you're accredited by, but if you have to follow their guidelines, you may have these CLIA categories that do apply to you in that case. And if that is the case, then
so would you check on each of those?
Right. So
the ones that are applicable?
Right, exactly. So for this course here, this might be the assessment of problem-solving skills. It may not apply to any of the others here. So we can just say add activity, and if I scroll down, you'll see here, there's that demo competency course 2.4. It's got 1 checklist task. It has no corrective actions. And we can edit the course in questions. We can edit the checklist that's attached to that course, or we can go back in and view the details here, which is what of these assessments from CLIA apply to this item. So from here, we can even view the course. We can go in here and actually see a preview of the course itself, and I can flip through and see, what checklist items do we have. Here is just a blank checklist item. We can have the requirement that you have to complete the checklist first before you can move on to the exam. So depending on the kind of course you create, they have to follow all of the restrictions you created within that said course. If you let them skip the checklist and go on to the exam, then you can have that as an option, and basically it would have let me skip the checklist item that I couldn't complete on my own, and then it would have let me go forward onto the exam where I would have taken however many questions were in that course. So again, these can be courses, checklists, direct observations are great with checklists. You've got the non-MediaLab activities, which are just kind of an attended training day type of activity. You've got many other things, document sign-offs from document control, uploading a file to where people can click the button or fill that out. So there's many different things that let you assess the competency of a user. You can have as many courses, checklists, document sign-offs as you want, as long as they help you to fill all of those CLIA categories. That's really the goal here, because for each test, for each assessment, if it's annual or your initial or your 6 month, they have to complete all of the different categories for all of those tests in all of those periods. So that's a place where many facilities fall short, and this is a system to help you make sure you're fulfilling those items. And you can easily see just by looking at those bubbles that are next to the applicable CLIA competency assessment procedures, are they all green? If they weren't, if I scroll down on my screen, you'll see there's a red one here on this item, the 7th New York one. In this case, for our facility, we're located right outside of Atlanta, so it doesn't really matter for us here. But if you wanted to follow that procedure, you would want to make sure that all of the items across the board here are set as green. And Joyce, if you look at the one you've created,
sorry, just a question. Question. So that top green bar relates to all the items listed below.
Right. This top bar calculates all the items below here. So in my items here, if I show the initial training and assessment, as I hover, you'll see it will highlight in the different areas where it applies this item. This first bubble here applies to these items in the initial training and assessment. So these activities, when I hover over the first one, these are the initial training and assessments activities that apply to direct observation. If I scroll down and I hover over this one, you'll see it gives me that 6 checklist tasks for that generic competency checklist. That is that bubble being completed by that item. And as I scroll over, you'll see it highlights them as applicable. So some of these apply in more than one category, which could be the case in some. If it was a course with a checklist, it might be direct observation and problem solving. So it tries to highlight and let you know which one of these activities is helping.
So it's the ones that are yellow? It's the ones that are yellow then, right?
Right.
Yeah. To that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and you'll see as I move.
I'm starting to see the new one. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can move through, and it highlights as I move my mouse through.
Okay.
So that shows you what meets those categories. So you don't have to go through one at a time to say what's meeting these categories, because that would be very difficult if you had to go one at a time and say, all right, details, what does this first one meet? Well, we've got 6 and 7. That's great. So now let's look at the second one. All right, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we know in our brains, just between those two, we're meeting everything. But maybe we don't want to go through every one to try to add all those up. So we can just easily scroll through and have it highlight across those green bubbles to show us which one applies to those items.
Okay.
So with that, the goal, the main thing you're trying to accomplish here when you're creating the competency assessment is in the initial, the 6-month, and the annual, as applicable if you have to have the 6-month, is you want these bubbles next to the applicable CLIA competency assessment procedures, you want them all to be green. And obviously appropriately green. You wouldn't want to say direct observation if it was a course with 1 graded question. That wouldn't really make a lot of sense at that point. So if it makes sense to the categories you've chosen for these different activities, and you see that you're fulfilling all of these activities, then for this profile, I would say at this point, we're done. We're good to go. We've completed all 6 categories, even the 7th in New York on some of them. For this profile, my Avid Precision Exceed Pro, it's ready. And I can then assign that to my...
What I like about, I don't know, you can't see, Joyce, but what I really like about it is it basically lists the activities that are required for the initial assessment, lists the activities that are required for the 6-month assessment, and then list the activities that are required for the ongoing annual assessment.
Right, and the annual assessment
for a given test system, right?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Just for a given test system, it's kind of, you build it that way.
Right, and with the annual assessment, these are rolling annual assessments. So whatever you build here, it will continually assign those activities every year that follows. That way, you're not having to go back in and reassign these same courses. It automatically knows that course, calculates that based on the dates that you've set in the system.
Okay.
So
when you're running, like that first page where you were showing the home and to-do, okay, let's go through the match assessments to users.
All right. So with the competency assessments here, you'll see some of them have a wrench and some of them are green. What happens when you're looking at your competency assessment list is before you can assign it to your users, it has to be in the green status. To get it there, there's 2 different paths it could take. One is you haven't created what we call a little further up on the competency assessment page a competency assessment approval process. If the competency assessment doesn't have an approval process, then anybody who's editing that competency assessment, when they're done with the add, edit, and delete activities, at the top it says start the approval process for this competency assessment. If we didn't have a competency assessment approval process in place, it would simply say publish this competency profile, which would then make it available for us to assign it to our users. And that's just clicking through, yes, I want to publish it, yes, I'm sure I want to publish it, and then it would be able for us to assign to our users. On the one I'm showing you here, it has the start approval process. And these approval processes can have as many people as you want. We've got 2 people here. We've got a Teresa Barnett. We've got a Christian Bale here. Batman is our second step here. So with these are people approving the profile before we can assign it to users. This is great if you've got people like a head tech who's in charge of helping, who might then push it to the supervisor of that section to get the approval before they then assign it to their users.
Okay.
So you don't have to have these approval processes. They're completely optional. You can have as many people in them as you want. You can have them go out in this ordered fashion where it's one person approves, then the next person approves when the first person's done. Or you can have that mashed together and send out an email to all of those people at once, and then they approve it in whatever order you like them to. That way you're not waiting on any one person in the process. So when that's completed, and when you're in the green status, you can then match that assessment to your users. And then to do that, it's under Match Assessments to Users at the top, and you just choose the first link, Match Competency Assessments to Performing Employees. And when you do that, it's going to give you a list of the competency assessments that are in the green status. You'll see here the one I had with the really long name isn't in here because it's not approved. So in this case, these are the ones that I have approved. So for example, if I choose, let's say, this Abbott iStat, and I'll scroll through my users here and I'll try to assign it to Anna Admin, and we'll go ahead and try to assign everything to Anna Admin. That's the user I'm logged in as. And if I hit Save and Match, it will tell me 5 competency assessments were matched to one user, and it tells me that Abbott iStat was already matched to Anna Admin, and that this other one, Abbott iStat 10.8, was already matched to her as well. So that means that somebody previously had already done that. So this is just telling you that if there was a conflict, that everything's still okay because it matched what it needed to, and it went ahead and didn't match it again for these 2 here. And then we have the option to select starting statuses for newly matched competency assessments. So now that you've assigned that to your users, we need to know where are they with this assessment. And here's why. Imagine you have a new hire. Obviously for that person, they have to go through the initial training and assessment for all of the things they're responsible for. Now imagine somebody who's been there for 20 years. Odds are they've probably completed many different annual assessments for all of the competency profiles. You wouldn't want to assign, again, those initial activities to somebody who's been there for 20 years. So that's why you select the starting status for these users for the competency profiles. And then when I go to Match Assessment to Users, I can click to select the starting status. What I'll do is just run a report for all users and all competency assessments. And when I do that, it gives me a list of people here that need their competency assessment status assigned. So you'll see the name of the person, the competency assessment, and the current status. What has this user completed? If everybody is kind of in the same boat and you're managing this for one competency profile, maybe it's a new instrument, you can copy down whatever you select from the first box. That way you don't have to copy it for everybody, and you can click the button at the bottom to save it for all those users. Or you can go one user at a time and select where they are in that process. So in the drop-down for the process, you can see the first option is not started, needs initial assessment now. If I select this option and click Save next to it, it will automatically assign Judy Bennett those first initial assessments. She'll get them right away, and she'll have to complete them within the next 30 days, or whatever window you gave them in that competency assessment itself. The second option is already completed initial assessment. And for that, it wants you to put in a date. So it says completed on, and you can type in your date here, which would be something like, let's say, 2015-1-1. So for January 1st, that is when Judy Bennett completed her Abbott ISTAT 10-8. What will happen here is, since we are about the 6-month period away from when she completed that, about now it would probably already have assigned her that 6-month assessment. So it's going to assign her the 6-month assessment. It will get whatever due date it should have had. So if this person is delinquent on completing a competency assessment, it will keep the old due date, and that way people will start getting alerted. If they assign this to somebody who's already past due, it will let them know that that's the case. That user will get that assigned to them, and it will tell them they need to do that right away. You have the person already completed the 6-month assessment. It wants to know the initial assessment date and the 6-month assessment date here. So here is the initial completed date. Here's the completed date of the 6-month assessment. The reason it needs to know the 6-month assessment is we base your annual assessments on when you completed your initial assessment, not when you completed your 6-month assessment. That way you stay within those windows. If you completed January 1st, we want your annual to be January 1st of next year. And we want it to roll that way throughout the assessment of this user. Now, it's going to be assigned early, and if they complete it early, that's perfectly fine. We just don't want people to get so far ahead that they start completing an annual assessment really early, and things might look weird at some point. So we would put our 6-month assessment date here and our initial assessment date here. The last option is that they completed an annual assessment, and you simply put the annual assessment date here, and that's how it knows to complete those rolling annual assessments. And then again, if I just hit save here next to any of these really quickly, you'll see it tells me status saved, initial assessment assigned now, due 7/3/2015, user notified by email. So for Judy Bennett, she had never started anything. This is her initial assessment I've assigned. She has 1 month to do it based on when we created our competency profile. That's the length of time we're giving her to complete it, and she was notified by email. So for this, you're just simply matching your users and then setting their starting point so the system knows where they are within this process. And once it knows, it will continue and automate that process from year to year. Now, there are items that you would need to complete as an administrator for your users, something such as a direct observation. Obviously, you wouldn't want users putting in that, yes, my administrator did absolutely observe me, because then maybe that's not the case. Maybe you have an employee who's maybe confused about that, and they put it in wrong, or maybe not completely truthful about, yes, it's already been done. So your administrators would have to go in and complete those items like the direct observation. To do that, it's very easy, and you can do it one of two ways. The first is you can search the person's name in the top right-hand corner, or sorry, top left-hand corner, and I have searched for my user, Anna Admin. And from here, if I scroll down, I can see every profile we've assigned to her, and if she's up to date, and here I can expand any of these to see where she is with these items. So I can see ones she completed outside of the system. I can see ones that she completed inside of the system. I would be able to, from the drop-down list, go in and actually complete the checklist tasks for Anna Admin in here. The other way I can do this, if I didn't want to do it from this side, is I could go up to reports in the top right-hand corner. I can search in reports to find their competency profiles. Any one of them with the details link on the right-hand side, I can expand that to get the additional actions here. So for this item in red that says this person hasn't completed their assessments, for this one here, it says 5 of 5 checklist tasks complete, 5 of 5 sign-offs complete, or 0 of 5 sign-offs. I could go in here and view and edit checklist here, and that will let me go in and do the administrative checkoffs for this checklist. And here on the left, you'll see I completed it as an administrator, but the student didn't go here and do it on the right-hand side. And then I can return to the report and complete going through it as necessary here. So you can do it that way as well. The very last way is observations and activity completions. This is very similar to the reports tab on the right-hand side. The difference is it's going to give you just a list of the incomplete activities in just a flat-out list here. So it's not going to bundle them into the different competency profiles, although it will tell you what profile it's for. Here's Abbott ISTAT initial training. Here is the exam not started. If we scroll over, we get the same kind of drop-down to view and edit the checklist where applicable. And we can look through and complete any of these administrative actions. These are also shown and available if I go to my home and to-do page. If I scroll down on my to-do list here, it says 18 overdue assignments, and I can view that report. And when I do, I can open these up to see there are things as an administrator I might need to complete. So I can go through here and complete these as well. So notifications go out about these things to make sure people are appropriately completing these, both the student side, that's the user type person, and the administrator who's going in and doing things like the direct observation, checking them off for the generic items like did you attend training day. You can put extra notes on all of these items. That's the little kind of notes box here. I can put a note on any of the assessments. I can also attach files to each assessment if I'd like to. That's great if, let's say, they attended training day and there was a sign-off sheet. You scanned it in so you can upload that sign-off sheet for all your different users. You just click the little paperclip with a number next to each of those activities that's been assigned that has the paperclip, and then you can upload that file, which basically lets you add a description. You can choose the file and put any notes you'd like on that file. So these are just things that prove that the person's done all that they've needed to do. You can also add additional activities to the assessment. If the assessment doesn't quite have all of the things you wanted assigned to a specific user, you can add additional one-off assignments to that user, and that way they can go through and complete those additional items as well. So where you might have some people who are they do something on the Abbott ISTAT blood glucose meter, maybe they need an additional item because they do something above and beyond what everybody else does. They're responsible for something that the generic users don't do. So you might add that as a manual item. Here you go in and click this, choose, as you did before when you were adding the items, is it a course or a checklist or another activity? You choose what it completes in the CLIA categories, and then you add that activity to that user, and it shows up appropriately on all of their reports and calculates into, did you finish your competency assessment? So that's pretty much the full run through of Compass. From creating your profiles, that's the first step, your competency assessments themselves with the initial, the 6-month, and the annual. There's making sure those meet your CLIA categories, approving or publishing that so you can then assign it to your users. When you assign it to your users, that's the matching button at the top. You then go in and set the starting point for those users so the system knows what to assign. And then once it's been assigned, your users will get the notifications like they do in compliance and CE that, hey, you need to complete a course. So for many of these things, it's taking that requirement that your administrator constantly stay on top of these people or manually assign these courses and automates that process. So much of that is now not an issue to where you'd have to track those things down. So you're putting some of that responsibility on the users while still making sure through the system's notifications that those things are actually being done. So you're still being notified and you're not having to do it maybe in an Excel spreadsheet that's got a huge matrices of what's going on for each user. So that is the point of those. And then finally, going through and completing everything you need to as administrators for those assessments, such as completing the direct observation checklist, signing off that they did the other activity like attended training day, and once everybody's completed, hopefully the thing you want to see is that the pie chart on the front page of your to-do list is all green. That is the hope. That is the dream. It's an attainable goal. It's a very difficult one, but we hope that it makes it much, much easier using something like our program and not a manual system where you have to track these things down, track people down, assess these things, as an emergency because the person didn't do it, they're past due. You're having to put off other people's assessments. So this is hopefully going to ease some of that stress and some of that complexity that you had before, take some of that time that you were wasting on competency assessment and put that towards things like billable hours. So it's going to help in that fashion as well.
I have a couple questions. I guess what I see is one of the biggest challenges for DSM with this system is the fact that we have so many employees in so many locations, and trying to, I guess, build competencies appropriately for every site. Like, we have a lot of things built already.
Right.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, doing that initial creation matchup with each employee.
Right. So there's
a lot of work.
Yeah, and there's a few things you can do there. If you trust somebody at those sites to know their employees and know what kind of competency assessments need to be built, you can talk to these different sites, and under users, you can create, if I scroll down here, let's see if I can find it. Yes, we do have sub-administrators in Compass, like Compliance and CE, and those users will be able to do things like add additional competency profiles. So you've got a group sub-administrator and a competency assessment sub-administrator. One is you can create new competency assessments and edit any competency assessment, or you can create specific competency assessments that that person has been over and that they would have to manage. So let's say for each facility, they all have a blood glucose test, and maybe it's different. You want them to assess things differently. There's a couple ways you can do that and have that person be responsible for creating it. You can give them this, which is create new competency assessments and edit any competency assessment. The problem here is they might overreach and edit somebody else's competency assessment. So that might be too far. What you can do then is, if you create the competency assessment for that site, just the assessment, not the activities or the courses or things that fill it, then they can be assigned it here. So here, for example, that Abbott iStat one, this person can then only edit the Abbott iStat profile that I assign them. So then what you can do is you can manage what assessments they have, but then assign somebody to actually create and flesh out that assessment and assign it to their users. And you can make group sub-administrators who can then assign things to people so they can be over a specific group. You can say view reports, record observations and manage users. That way they can assign those profiles to their users. So with these combinations, I know it's a great deal of users, but once this initial setup has been done, it will then roll from now until whenever you either retire that assessment because you're no longer using that instrument, or the site closes, or the world explodes. You know, all the way up until that point, the system will just keep on automating the whole process for you.
So does the system recognize if, say, we archive an item and replace it with another item?
If you archive it, basically you can deactivate a competency profile. It will stop people from being assessed on that profile. All history will still be there for all of the users who have taken that profile. So Abbott iStat, obviously you want the history for they did that for the next few years at least, because you have to prove, if an inspector came through, yeah, in previous years they did have this competency and now we might be using something else. So they'll have history, the previous history for this instrument, as well as the new assignment for your new competency assessment for whatever instrument you might be using now or platform that replaces the old one. So it doesn't directly correlate that, yes, the Abbott iStat was replaced by this other machine, but it does show the history for both of those. That way people who are inspectors or administrators can see that. Now, if that's something that would interest you and that's something that, you know, would bring a good feature to the system that shows, you know, we did do Abbott iStat, but now we've replaced it with this other item, we can try to add that functionality to the system for you. It's not something we've had requested before, but I can see there might be some value in that if that's something that, you know, that's something you would want to see, that kind of flow of we moved from Abbott iStat to a different instrument.
No, I want to make sure that you could remove things, because I see, the instrumentation changes, and that you wouldn't lose the history. So the fact that you wouldn't lose the history, I think, is the most important piece of that.
Right. Right, and that's the
Yeah.
deactivate link right here next to in the competency assessments. When you deactivate the assessment, that basically takes it away from all users, keeps the history, nobody can complete any new items, and that's just basically like saying this is retired. Now, once you deactivate it, you also can then view the inactive ones to
Okay.
look to reactivate it. Let's say you changed from the Abbott iStat to something else, but then you found that the new instrument you were using is now recalled, so you swap back to your old instrument. You might want to reactivate the Abbott iStat, so that will appropriately be listed in here. You can click to reactivate it as necessary, or if you created one by accident, you can then delete a competency profile from here if it was just erroneously entered into the system and you wanted to remove it completely.
Okay. And if individuals move from, say, groups to groups or departments to departments, then they would start that initial 6-month annual process all over again?
If they move groups,
Like I'm saying, if they move from chemistry to hematology, so they're at the annual process in the chemistry. Is there a way to sort of say, okay, you're moving from chemistry to hematology, now you're being assigned initials for hematology 6 months after your 6 months? So it's just through the new competencies added that process happens?
well, it looks at the user and it says, what are you responsible for? It doesn't necessarily see that they're moving from one section to another. So if you were, let's say, if chemistry and hematology both had a competency assessment assigned to those groups, and the user was in chemistry, but now you move them to hematology, it would say, oh, you're responsible for the same thing you've already done. In the other area, you were going to keep you where you were before. If you need to restart them for any reason, all you have to do is unmatch them and then rematch them to that profile, and it will basically start them from the initial at that point on. So you can, depending on how you want that to play out, you can have it continue, if they're just moving locations and continuing that assessment, it's the same assessment for both sections, it can just continue that. Or if it's a different assessment but the same instrument, all you have to do is just assign the other competency profile if it's a new, or competency assessment if it's a new one, or unmatch them and rematch them to have it start over on that instrument, then going from annual and rolling back to the initial. It doesn't, again, get rid of any history. It just starts over for that user, if that's what you want.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would want.
Yep.
Okay. So I do see, that it does take away a lot of the tracking. We find that it has a lot of potential. The challenge I'm going to see is trying to get through our trial a comfort level,
right,
of that this is all working and doable, and because we did, like I said, we were assigned it as a beta site or whatever,
right,
over a year ago, but we found that the communications that were going out to, I guess, other site administrators,
right,
was becoming confusing to people.
right.
So we sort of stopped even looking at it for a while.
We've since changed that whole process of the notifications that go out, and we have email options now that you can set in the system, so you're not set with this is absolutely going to go out. You have no other option. So we've now changed how those go out, changed what options you have to either enable those or disable certain communications. So that's now been changed. So that's completely different than what it was before.
Okay. So I guess my question to you is, Joyce and I are probably going to play with this and try and create a trial. Joyce, do you have any questions? I know you haven't been able to see anything, so it's probably...
Thanks, that's pretty comprehensive program that we could, definitely we could use it. And, it's kind of easier to understand because we've already been using the other part of it. But my question, because, even though this system, once set up, is going to do all this assigning, there's still a lot of clerical work to make some decisions in the first place, right? Like, are they a new user, and are they getting in chemistry, and you know, it sounded like a lot of decisions still. So I'm wondering if you have any sense of how many clerical support positions per staff other users have allocated?
Well, yeah, and it depends on the scope of the site. You know, are they using it for just point of care staff? Are they using it for their laboratory as well? Are they using it for just certain instruments or all instruments or certain users? So um, the thing I have seen, which believe it or not, this happens quite often, is I've seen one site that has probably, I want to say it's 100 to 250 users, and by himself, one man has gone through and created all of the competency profiles because they already had the courses created within compliance and CE, so he just moved those over, created the profiles, and then assigned them to the correct people. Now that, granted, that took him a couple months to go through and have to assign all those people those items. So it really depends on, if you take multiplicatively the number of users you have, the number of assessments each user has, and then the actual assigning and setting the starting point for those users, so those 3 different items, and you multiply that out and you see what your total number is there, and you think, how long would it take me to do these things? How long would it take me to put the user in the system, to assign it to that person, to set the starting point? And, you know, that doesn't include creating the profiles themselves. So, you know, taking that into account, it can give you a rough mathematical, here's the number of items we have to complete. And if you give, let's say, if you've already got your courses completed in compliance and CE, that's a big step. I mean, that will save you many, many hours of time in having to create those. So shifting that over to Compass will save you a great deal of time just from the start. Creating your profiles could take one profile. I've seen somebody complete a profile in a day or 2. So if you've got, let's say, in hematology, if there's 20 profiles, that may be 20 days if one person can complete a profile a day. And then assigning it to the hematology users, if they know who it needs to be assigned to, assigning it should be fairly quick. Setting the starting point might take a little bit longer, and I'd say that might take a week. So for one person, for 20 profiles, maybe a month if they got everything in there, if they didn't have more than one person. Now, if you want, let's say, 100 activities in a profile, that's a whole different story, because now you've got many, many more activities. Or if you have bare bones where it's just one activity that fulfills all 7 requirements or 6 requirements, which is doubtful, but if you somehow had that, you would be able to just do one activity and say, okay, I'm done, and then that's the one thing for the assessment. So it also just depends on how complex you want to make your assessments as well. So again, we've seen one site go through, and in a couple months, he had everybody in the system all by himself. It was a little less complex on the assessments, so it didn't have maybe all of the activities that you would have, but he definitely had enough to fulfill the requirements. So it's then, I would say, dependent on those numbers and also the people you're assigning to do these things. Because if there's resistance to it, or they have a hard time, or they're not tech savvy, or they do it the wrong way because they didn't understand something, that can extend the time it takes and the number of people you might want. But I would say, you know, creating a profile, if you say it's a day per profile and you calculate how many profiles you might need, that's probably an easy way to go about seeing at least the number. And then it's, how long do you want to spend? Do you want to be up at the end of this month, or do you want to be up in at least 6 months? Because that gives you a lot more time. So if you want it to be done quicker, I would definitely put more people on it, and people who know what need to be assessed and what kind of activities you'd want to have in those assessments and why it's important to have those activities. So I can't, in all good conscience, give you an exact number on what it is, because I've seen many different configurations and many different types of, they had one person, they had 12 people, they had 30 people doing different sections. So it's just a difficult number to give.
That's great information. That's helpful, Michael. And so then, say, I'm just trying to think how we'd roll this out. And we have, like I think it's 6 or 7 regions. So, would it be something that other people do where you would get a team of, say, 6 to 10 people who start learning this all together and then figure out how they're rolling it out, each person taking a certain group? Do you see sites or places doing that?
Yeah.
You said some people use 12 people, so do they kind of work as a team then?
Well, I've seen 2 things happen with teams where they picked multiple people. One thing is it was a laboratory that had 12 different sections. Each section went off and did their own thing. They created their own assessments. They didn't talk to each other and all were separate of one another. They just built their own assessments, assigned it to their own people, chemistry assigned to the chemistry people, and that was it. In that case, that's one thing we've seen. The other thing we've seen is that some sites have worked as a team. They've made generic checklists for some things, and they've shared that across all the different competency profiles or competency assessments. That way, they didn't have to recreate the wheel every time they made an assessment. So that's something your team could work on. Now, I would definitely say I would have, if you've got sections that you can section these off into. I know you've got a large number of users, and I don't know the exact organization because obviously the name of your organization is of Manitoba, which makes me think it's all of Manitoba. So then the question becomes, what kind of breakdowns do you have within that organization? Is it by region, like a small sliver? Is it by individual labs? What kind of organizational breakdown, I guess, do you have that you might be able to go by?
We do have regions, so I would say that we probably have to roll it out by regions, is my thinking. Because,
there's various ways that we could roll it out, and you've given us 2, Michael. I just wondered, and that's exactly what I wanted to know. Do some places get teams? Like right now there's, me and Tricia doing it, and I think we've got, is it 1,500 employees?
Yeah.
So there's no, we're not going to do all of this that you just went over. It's like mind-boggling. I can see us needing about 10 people on a team.
Right, absolutely, yeah. And then the other question that might help also is, for these assessments, across the different regions, across the different labs, do you want the assessment to be standardized across all of those different sites? Or in some cases, is it going to be different for certain laboratories or different regions because maybe they do things a little bit differently at their site, so they might need to change what their assessment is just slightly because they do something different as well.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Well, and then there's some specialty stuff that's sort of centralized and only done in a few spots, right? So that's the other thing too.
Right, and so now when you look at it, when you look at the regions and you look at all of this, is it really broken down by you have X number of labs that are in Manitoba and that makes up all of DSM? Is that how it works?
Yeah, there's 87.
87. Okay, so with 87 labs, I would say. If they could, and if they could standardize this, if you could get, because the issue you might have is if you get 10 people, that's a good number of people, but if it's 87 labs, they might not know what every lab does. So if you made every lab responsible for their own competency assessments, then they could then know what they need at that point, but then they might be duplicating work that's already been done at one of the other 87 labs or other 86 labs at that point. So the big question is, if you got consensus between those 87 labs to say, what all instruments do we use in these sections for hematology, give me all the instrument names, let's build competency profiles that get standardized across all of these different 87 for these specific instruments, and for those specific sites, we'll know which ones apply to which sites. Then you're not having to duplicate the work because, for example, the Abbott iStat might be used at 35 of those 87 sites. So why recreate it for each individual site when you can create it once and then just assign it to those 35 sites if they all use it the same way?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, so it's a little bit difficult to pull the scope and see, you've got 87, what do we use, how do we, best pick a team who would be able to put these together. What we've seen many times is that if you're not standardized between your policies and procedures, you're not standardized in instrumentation, many hospital systems will actually just allow each site to manage all of their own stuff, which then it's usually the supervisor of each section makes their own profiles that they need, their own assessments. They might have a lead tech help them out. Once it's created, they then just assign it to their users, and that's that at each individual site. So we've seen all sorts of combinations. That if you really don't have any kind of sharing, if you need it to just be each site has their own people doing their own thing and we're just going to leave each 87 to do their own, or if you do have standardization, that's a great thing because then you're able to control one profile that might apply to 30-something locations, which then makes things easy if you ever need to update.
Okay.
So just some things to think about.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any other questions, Joyce?
No, thanks.
Okay. So I guess my next question, Mike, is that we do have access to Compass in our current system with our current users, and I know we started something with what some of the Westman group. Would your recommendation be to continue on with our current system because it has users and stuff built in and just trial with it a bit that way, or would it be to use our trial system, which our trial is expiring this week?
I would go in the trial just to see what it's like to maybe create an assessment. And here's the big thing too: pick something that's a real case, something you actually have it in the laboratory. So pick the instrument or the test that's going to be performed. Make a competency assessment in the system. See how long it takes you. Actually time yourself to see how long it takes. Create a fake user, assign it to that user, time the whole process, and then realize that this is what it would be for your real site. And that way you can take those metrics and bring it to the real site. Because doing it in the real site, if you're not really ready and you've got many users and you're really trying to figure out how much time it actually is going to take you, and then do that at your real site. Once you have a good idea of how many people you might need, you might realize as you're creating a profile that, wow, maybe we do need to do this differently because site A does things different than site B. Things might become more apparent as you're creating something. So in the trial, I would just, in the next few days, really quickly, make a fake profile, add stuff to it, see what it's like, and then once you have those metrics, it takes me an hour to make the profile, to create most of it, to assign it to a user. That's not so bad. That might be a good number to go with. If you have a very complex profile, create one like that. See how long it takes you. If it took you 6 hours, now that's a completely different amount of time. So it at least gives you something to play with. I would do that first in the test environment, which we can extend if you need a little bit more time. And then I would then move from there. But I would start off small. Don't try to roll out everybody at once. That's what many people try to do with our...
No. That wasn't what I was thinking, but I was thinking like in our current system, we have all of those competency things built.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
From the CE and compliance perspective that we would pull on.
Yep.
To which we don't have in the test environment.
Right. Yeah, that's true. You can still create test profiles in compliance and CE, or in your actual subscription with compliance and CE. What you can do is create a competency assessment in there. That's just a dummy one. I know you've got 2 already that you've created that are just kind of hanging out in here: the specimen management Westman Lab and the WL microbiology annual competency. What I would do is fill these out with your current existing courses, see how long that takes you. Create a fake dummy user in the system. You still got some seats open. Assign it to that dummy user, and then that can be your metric for how long it takes. And then what you can do is, once you know that number, delete the fake assessment. You deactivate it first and then delete it, and then just delete that fake user from the system. And that way you can still have those courses to play with. When you delete the competency assessment, it doesn't get rid of the existing courses, so it's not going to delete the courses or the checklists or anything like that. It just deletes the kind of bundling of those items together.
Okay. Yeah, because that's the only thing. It's like, you know, because if we try and do it in the trial system and it's small, but then we don't have anything like built that we're pulling from, right?
Right, exactly.
All our existing work. So, okay, so I appreciate that'll help us a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd give that.
And I think the wonderful thing about having this videotape, Joyce, is that we can share it with the team.
Yeah, that's
and anybody else who may need to see it.
So thanks for making that, Michael. That's awesome.
Sure, absolutely. And what I'll do is I'll get this recorded, I'll get it converted, and then I'll put it somewhere that you'll be able to download it for about the next week. So what you can do is, if you want to download it, if you've got it somewhere on your intranet, you can store it. I would do that and give people that link, because if we leave it on the website, it's going to be a public link. That way you can get to it. So I'll put it up there, and it will take a while before it's seen by anybody. So, you know, it might be picked up after 3 weeks that somebody, you know, finally comes through and Google crawls our website, finds that there's a video in this folder. But what I'll do is put it there. I'll tell you, you know, here it is. Let me know once you've downloaded it and made it available to those users, and then I'll remove it from our website. That way it's not just overly available to anybody who decides to try to view that file.
Okay. Thank you so much.